You're listening to a bonus episode of The Dairy Edge featuring Teagasc's weekly Let's Talk Dairy webinar series, which is also available as a podcast.
You're very welcome to this morning's webinar. This morning I'm joined by Emer Kennedy. Emer is a researcher based in Moore Park, and she's kind of the go-to person when I want to talk to someone about newborn calves or calf feeding and calf rearing. So you're very welcome to our short webinar here this morning, Emer.
Thanks, George.
Now, I've our focus here this morning, Emer, is about kind of milk feeding, kind of guidelines and recommendations for the young calf. So I've a slide up there, and it's taken from the calf care events that are running around the country over the next couple of weeks. The first one has already taken place, so there's another one on this morning, and they're running until the 26th of January. And we advise or encourage people maybe to go and sit in one of those events. But Emer, you're going to talk me through some of the details in this slide here. It's kind of based on our best practice around kind of rearing young calves or milk feeding to the young calf. So we'll start on day one, Emer, and I suppose the old 1, 2, 3 is where we start with the young calf, isn't it?
Yeah, so like when the calf is born, I guess the first thing we want to ensure is that the calf is born into a really clean environment, because if we think about it, when the calf is in utero, there's no transfer of antibodies between the cow and the calf. So unlike us, as humans, we're born with a developed and functioning immune system. The baby calf is reliant on that colostrum to kickstart its immune system. So you can imagine if you had no immune system and you were born into a dirty environment, you're immediately going to start picking up bugs. So a clean environment, and then making sure you get the colostrum in as soon as possible. If we talk about the colostrum 1, 2, 3, the first thing is first milking. And really, when we're saying first milking, that's the first milk that the cow produces after she calves. But this, that's the colostrum, but it's also really high in quality. So it's full of like extra growth factors, vitamins, minerals. It's essentially like a superfood for the calf. And really, we only know the quality of that colostrum if we test it, and we can test it using a Brix refractometer. So what we're looking for is values above 22%. So once it's over 22%, that means there's enough antibodies in it to essentially kickstart the calf's immune system and get it going. So that's what we should be feeding. I guess one of the main things to look out for there is the time from calving is one of the big factors that affects the quality of it. So the further you go from calving, the poorer the quality of colostrum. So 9 hours is kind of the cutoff there. So really, like for example, if you have a cow that calves at 5 o'clock in the evening and she's not milked, we'll say until 8 or 9 o'clock the next morning, the quality of that colostrum will be a lot poorer than if that cow calved, say, at 7 o'clock in the morning, as milked an hour later at 8 o'clock. So that's the big thing, is to check that we have very good quality colostrum. Obviously, iones, and we need to be aware of that as well.
Okay. Just take us through the whole thing about the 3 litres then. Why 3 litres, Emer? Where does that come from?
Okay, so if we're on the colostrum 1, 2, 3 rule, so 1 is first milking, 2 is within 2 hours of birth, and then 3 is our 3 litres. So this is basically just to make sure that the calf is getting enough antibodies into its system. So if we take like the average birth size, we'd say, of a dairy calf is about 35 kilos, a little bit bigger, we'll say, for maybe a bull calf. And if you think that, like, if we look at beef breeds that are being born, so some of those could be like 50, 60 kilos for your Charolais Limousin crosses. So basically it's about 8.5% of their birth body weight that we want to feed them. So that's 3 litres for a 35 kilo calf. But as I say, if you have heavier calves, you potentially need to feed those a little bit more colostrum to ensure that they're getting enough antibodies in to get that immune system going.
So it could be 4 or 5 litres for the heavier calves.
Yeah, so like if it's around 60 kilos, it could be 5 litres that you're feeding.
Okay, should be a fair popper of a calf. Tell us then about the second step then the transition milk feeding, Emer.
So transition milk then, so like if we look at how the calf absorbs antibodies, like absorption of those antibodies is maximised within the first 2 hours after it's born, and it starts to kind of deteriorate then and wane off. So by 24 hours of age, the calf technically can't absorb any more antibodies. But that said, transition milk should still be fed, because although the calf may not be absorbing the antibodies, there's still a local effect in the lining of the gut, so it's giving extra protection. And particularly if you're vaccinating your cows, we say for coronavirus, you really need to feed that transition milk to get the benefit of it. So it's still, although it's not as high quality as colostrum, it's still much better than mature milk to feed to calves. And from studies that we've done here, we found that by feeding that 2.5 litres of colostrum per feed, so 5 litres per day, what we find is that we had less instance of ill health, less droopy ears, runny eyes and runny nose with the calf. So it's well worth feeding that transition milk for 3 or 4 days anyway. But again, you just bear in mind, if you have iones, there should be no pooling of that transition milk.
So no pooling if there's iones present, but if you know which cows are your iones positive ones, you could exclude them from being fed to the calves, couldn't you, and work away with the rest of it?
Yeah, if you've tested them and you're sure, yeah.
Yeah. So we're moving on then, Emer. We're going to talk about getting them on full feeding from around 6 days of age. So your options are whole milk or milk replacer. So if we're talking about the whole milk, it's pretty straightforward. What about if it's milk replacer then? Just tell us.
Well, just to go back on that whole milk, George, we shouldn't really be feeding any waste milk to the calves. So we want to make sure that the milk that we're feeding is high quality milk for the calves, because if you feed them, we'd say, cows that are maybe withdrawn for mastitis, or that are being injected for different reasons with antibiotics, there can be a risk there. With it, sometimes the milk can taste off. The calf mightn't drink as much, and it can cause digestive issues with them, as well as antimicrobial resistance issues. But so that aside, if we look then at milk replacer, I guess with it's pretty consistent that you're feeding the calf the same thing every day. Of course, it's also important to make sure that you're feeding a good quality product to the calf, so you need to select a product that works for you. So if you've been using something on the farm and you're happy with it, I'd say stick with it. There's no need to change. Ideally, what you'd be looking for is a protein content of 23 to 26%, a fat or an oil of 16 to 20%, and an ash and fibre less than 8.5% and less than 0.5. So if those values are getting close to that in terms of the ash and the fibre content, it's generally indicative of a poorer quality product, and one that's more likely to cause digestive upsets with the calves. So, although it can be hard to interpret the back of a bag, it's always worth looking at it just to see, what you're buying. And ideally, more milk-derived proteins, so like skim milk or whey protein, and that's not just coming out on the top of your head there, Emer, those specs. They're based on a kind of an agreed format from the AHI Technical Working Group on calf rearing, isn't that right? Yeah, and from research internationally as well. That's where those kind of values are coming from.
Okay. So from day 6 to 10 anyway, you're ramping up the calf up to about 6 litres a day of typically 12.5% content, so 125 grams of milk powder if you're feeding in powder per litre, or 750 grams a day, and you're trying to achieve your maximum growth rates. I see figures quoted of around 0.75 kilos of growth per day. What have you seen, Emer, at research level in terms of calf daily performance?
So
say for feeding 35 kilo birth weight calves.
Yeah, so as I say, we get a good picture of them here because we'd weigh them every single week. So after birth, there's, they don't really put on that much weight, just a little bit, maybe 0.3, 0.4 of a kilo for the first couple of weeks. So if we average it out over the whole pre-weaning period, we would basically be looking at somewhere between 0.6 and 0.7 of a kilo per day for those replacement heifers. So as I say, that there's a big range in that. So it's at the start, it's quite slow, but by the time it comes to weaning, they could be doing a kilo and a kilo and a half per day up at weaning. So once it's averaged out, I would say 0.6, 0.7.
Emer, from around day 29, so just after a month of age, there's the potential there to go from twice a day feeding to once a day feeding to save on labour. What kind of performance levels are you seeing in that situation?
What I would say about once a day feeding is like nobody should be once a day feeding before 4 weeks of age, because from a physiological point of view, the calf can't actually handle it. That the abdomen is too small for that 6 litres of milk to go in one feed, and also the rumen hasn't developed enough so that they can't utilize the nutrients from concentrate, which you're going to be feeding them a second time during the day. So we need to make sure all those things are in place before we change over to once a day. But from experiments that we've done where we have from 4 weeks of age compared once a day with twice a day feeding, there's absolutely no difference in the growth rate between the calves. It is a big labour saver. The one thing I would say is that if you are once a day feeding, that you need to make sure that the calves have a lot of fresh water and also ad lib concentrate, because they tend to drink a little bit more water, and they also eat a bit more concentrate during the day, I guess, to substitute from that second feed. And also, it's really important that just because you're once a day feeding the calves, it doesn't mean you just check the calves once a day. You still need to thoroughly check them through twice a day at least, to pick up anything that might be sick, and intervene if necessary before there's an outbreak in the shed.
But Emer, just to be clear about it, you're talking about a fairly mature calf going on once a day feeding, and you're still feeding the full 6 litres in a single feed when you go to once a day.
So when we've done our once a day feeding work, we have fed the 6 litres in one feed. But again, consistency is really important, that you're feeding that calf at the same time every day. So it doesn't matter what time you're feeding them their milk, as long as it's the same time every day.
Okay, so it's a big transition. And then you get to about 8 weeks of age, and you're talking about going just to one feed of 3 litres per day for that calf. You're in a kind of a wind down period to weaning, is that right?
Yeah, so like what we're trying to do here is, I guess, reduce the milk so that the calves will start to eat more concentrate, so that we're sure that we're getting really good rumen development. And if you think about it, like, if you have calves on a high volume of milk coming up to weaning, and then when you wean them, they're not used to any solid feed, so they're much more likely to lose that weight that they've put on with the milk, and have a much greater post-weaning check. So if we're kind of prepping them essentially for this transition to a more solid feed diet, it's going to be much more beneficial in terms of their post-weaning weight gain. So all that work and money that you're putting in to getting the calf to like weights at weaning, or putting on good weight during the pre-weaning period, it can be undone if you don't I guess get them prepared for that period post weaning. So from that, sorry.
No, go ahead, go on, Emer, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, like, it's really important that from the start, so from the very start, that the calves are given fresh water and concentrate. So essentially from the first week of life, you're starting off with that coarse ration. You're not talking about a lot, maybe just a handful or two that you're putting in front of them, just for them to nose, to smell, to start getting a little bit of a taste for it, and then they'll start eating more and more as the time goes on. But yeah, it's good to have them start, and water is also essential, because that's needed, I guess, for the bugs in the rumen to digest it, and also for rumen development.
Emer, question in there about maybe feeding more than the 6 litres, maybe up to 10 litres a day from an automatic feeder in maybe 2 litre feeds for the first 40 days. Any opinions on that?
Oh, well, like, yeah, they're going to do really well on it. You will get really good weight gains. There's some work internationally. It hasn't specifically been done here yet, where it shows that it's in the first 5 weeks, especially if you feed them very high volumes of milk, that it can lead to improved production performance during the first lactation and that. But I guess if you are feeding those high volumes, the critical thing there is to wean them down gradually, and also to make sure that they're eating enough concentrate. So, like, while there's no problem at the start, I would say just be mindful in the second half of that pre-weaning period that you're not going to wean them off, we'll say 10, 12 litres of milk to nothing when they haven't adjusted to eating solid food.
And then when we're coming up to weaning time, we often talk about maybe 18% as being the appropriate weight to wean them at. So, for example, for a cow with a mature weight of around 600 kgs, 18% would be close to 110 kilos. So it's going to take a while to do that. Would you have some more recent research showing that under excellent rearing conditions, we can wean at a slightly lighter weight? Would you like to just maybe share some of that information, please?
Yeah, so as part of Hazel Koskins' PhD, we fed calves 6 litres and we weaned some of them at 8 weeks and we weaned more of them at 12 weeks. Um, so like obviously the ones at 12 weeks were on milk for 4 weeks longer.
Yeah.
But what we found was by the time those calves reached 11 months, it was actually the post-weaning feeding regime that was taking effect, not the pre-weaning feeding regime. So essentially like there was no difference. The differences were just there from what we fed post weaning. And then when we looked at it in terms of their milk production, there was no difference either between the
in
calves
those
weaned at
heifers.
8 or 12 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is that the post weaning management is really, really important in terms of how the cattle perform, how those calves
Yeah.
perform. So if you
So
do a good job after a wean, you don't need to have them at a very heavy weight at weaning.
but what I would say is that you really can't take your eye off the ball from the minute that calf is born. You need to you need to get the colostrum in, you need to get the transition milk, you need to make sure that they're growing throughout. And then when
Yeah.
you wean them, you also need to keep your eye on them to make sure that they're on like a good trajectory to meet their target weights at the defined points like breeding. So you can't
Okay.
really afford to take your eye off them at any stage.
I often think of the work that Gerard Craig has done with his contract rearing group of farmers over in Roscommon. And he always told me that if they get a health check during the rearing process, that at breeding time it was costing 30 kilos in live weight by then. Now,
Yeah.
question in there: any benefit to the newborn calf by using probiotic chews that are being promoted a bit at the moment? They provide a lining of good bacteria in the gut. That's a good question.
To be honest, we haven't done any experiments on them, so I can't comment. There is anecdotal evidence there that people have found benefits of them, but we haven't done any
Yes.
research on
So
these.
it's kind of early days yet with those probiotics.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, they seem to be working, but we'd have to give a definitive answer on that, which we haven't got available to us yet. Maybe something for this spring, Emer. At the end of the long queue. Emer, just take us through a little piece on the right-hand side of that graph, on the left-hand side of that graph there. It's the one about the 400 and then the 150 and 350 grams. It's the powder equivalents, yeah.
So basically, what this is saying is that you should be feeding the calves 6 litres per day, which is essentially 15% of their birth body weight. So when you're looking at it there, 400 grams is for maintenance. So if you're only feeding them the 4 litres, that means you just have like 100 grams, we'll say, for growth. But not only growth, but also, if they come across, if there's a disease outbreak, the energy that's required to fight that. So it's really important that the calves, you can see there where they're fed 6 litres, they have that 350 that can be grams that can be apportioned to growth, to basically things other than maintenance. So keeping them healthy and that. So like it is beneficial, and you will get a payback from making sure that you're feeding them enough milk.
But I suppose it comes back to the point that Pádraig made earlier about feeding 10 litres a day. Yes, there's a benefit in terms of growth, but when you look at the longer term thing, do you actually need to have that big advantage at weaning, or a bigger weight at weaning time? Is it going to be just costly again for no additional benefit when she comes into milk later on?
Potentially, and like there's research done here, there's research done in UCD, and it's all showing that you can overdo your heifers as well, and that can reduce their subsequent production performance. So you have to strike a balance there and get a happy medium between the two.
Yeah, I've seen exceptionally well reared heifers, more than the target weights, and struggle to go in calf.
Yeah. And also, like what the data from here has also shown is that while they might go in calf, they don't last in the herd for as long, so they're falling out that bit faster, and so that means you have a higher replacement rate. And if you look at the economics of it, the most expensive system is actually where you're getting those heifers where they're too heavy, where they're way above their target weight, because you have the extra cost of putting that weight on them, and then they're not lasting in the herd as long, so you're not capitalizing on that mature milk yield from the cows.
Emer, I'm just going to ask our audience if they have any questions that I'd like to ask you before you go. But before, we're not going to go on for much longer. But before you go, what would be your 3 take-home messages about rearing young calves, milk feeding young calves for this coming spring?
Well, firstly, colostrum to me is like the most critical
Absolutely.
thing, because the effects are it's not just that first day. The effects are seen throughout their life.
That's
It has
quantity
effects
and quality, Emer. That's quantity and quality. Yeah.
It's the three things. It's the quality, it's the timing, and it's the quantity. So basically following that colostrum 1, 2, 3 rule. If
That's
that's
number
the
one.
best thing. Hygiene then is of paramount importance, because you want to minimize, I guess, the bugs that the calves have to fend off, essentially, so that they have nothing else to do other than grow. And like, my third thing then, I'll group transition milk in with colostrum and say to feed your colostrum and your transition milk. And then after that, to make sure that you're feeding enough milk replacer, but also introducing that concentrate from an early age, so that you're developing the rumen and getting them prepped for life post-weaning.
Okay. And Emer, just one question that often comes up. If we're feeding 6 litres a day, could we feed a litre of it as a kind of a transition milk as cows are calving to protect the calves for longer? Or would it be better to just take the clean break after day 5 or 6 and go on to a whole milk powder or whatever afterwards and forget about the transition milk? Could you give a little bit all the way along?
Well, it depends. I guess it depends on people's systems. If you have an automatic feeder, and you're sticking with the milk powder, some people stay on whole milk, and there's no problem. If you're on whole milk, there's no problem putting in the transition milk into that as well if you have surplus of it.
Okay. Question in there, Emer, about calf jackets. Have we seen any benefits from calf jackets?
There's lots of anecdotal evidence to say that people find benefits, and I know lots of people who use them and wouldn't stop using them. Scientifically, there's not really much evidence to show a benefit of wearing the jackets, but I guess it depends on a person's shed and situation as well.
I think from my own experience, what we've seen, attendee who asked the question, is they do give a benefit in the situation where the temperature of the house is cold, because the critical temperature for a newborn calf, is about 15 degrees or thereabouts. Yeah. They actually need more milk, or they need more energy, to burn more energy if they're cold, and they haven't got the benefit of room to protect them. So where a house temperature is low, they'll give you a benefit of the equivalent of around 10 degrees. Where the temperature is low, so there's a benefit there. But after 2 or 3 weeks, they're kind of becoming a kind of a proto-rumen, and it's starting to develop, and the benefits are probably gone at that stage. So if you have a cold house or a lot of cold weather, there may be some advantage to it, but it's generally pretty short-lived. A red lamp would do the same thing if you have young calves as well, maybe. But yes, they have a role to play in some cases. Ladies and gentlemen, look, without further ado, there's no more questions coming in. I'll thank Emer for her quick snapshot there on the kind of the latest on calf feeding. What was I going to say? Just remember that we have calf care events have already kicked off. There'll be one in your area over the next 2 to 3 weeks, so try and get to it if you can. You'll hear some of this material that Emer has presented and a lot more. Next week at the same time, I'm joined by Catherine McAloon from UCD's vet school to talk about managing calves that have scour. So that's something to look forward to next Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your attendance here today. And thank you, Emer, very much for your contribution to our webinar series here today. God bless now, and mind yourselves. Bye-bye.
That's all for this week's bonus episode from the Let's Talk Dairy webinar series, and don't forget to look out for more bonus episodes each week. I'll be back with the usual Dairy Edge podcast on Monday, so do listen in then. I'm Stuart Childs, and thanks for listening.